Welcome to the Empathy Stories channel, where we explore the power of courage, resilience, and the human spirit. In today's story, we witness the extraordinary bravery of Martha and her loyal dog, Rocky, as they face down danger and inspire a town to stand tall. Stay with us as we dive deep into a journey of survival, empathy, and the quiet strength that can change everything. The town of Willow Creek had long been known for its peaceful streets and tight-knit community, nestled between lush hills and a sprawling park. It felt like the kind of place where nothing ever went wrong. Families moved here for the quiet, the safety, and the sense of security that comes with a life lived at a slower pace. Yet, there are moments in life when the ordinary can turn into the extraordinary, when peace is shattered in an instant, and the hidden strength within us comes to light in ways we never expect. Martha Evans, a 67-year-old retired nurse, had seen her share of those fleeting, dramatic moments. Her life had been a steady rhythm, working in hospitals, raising her children, and caring for others in every way possible. Now, she was retired, content with her quiet existence, though still holding the same deep well of empathy and care that had guided her life. For Martha, every evening, without fail, was a ritual. It was time for a walk with Rocky, her trusted companion, a German shepherd who had once served as a police canine. Rocky was no ordinary dog. To most, he was just a loyal pet, a good boy who followed commands and protected his owner. But to Martha, he was a guardian. He had been with her through thick and thin since his retirement from the force. Once a fierce protector, he was now a companion who had earned his rest. Yet his instincts still ran deep. Rocky knew when something wasn't right, and he knew when to act. It was on one of these quiet walks, under the cool night sky, that Martha would learn just how much Rocky's old instincts still held sway. They had been walking along the edge of Willow Creek, the rustle of the leaves in the trees accompanying their steps. It was late, around 10 p.m., and the neighborhood was still. The only sounds were the occasional chirp of crickets and the rhythmic tapping of Martha's cane on the pavement. Rocky, as always, walked beside her, his ears perked up, his eyes alert to the world around him. But tonight, something felt different. Martha's keen sense of intuition told her that something wasn't right. She had lived in this neighborhood for decades, long enough to recognize when the air felt too still or when the shadows grew longer in ways they shouldn't. She could see them before she even heard their voices, the silhouettes of three men standing under the dim glow of a street lamp. Their figures stretched across the pavement, hunched together in a way that made Martha's stomach twist. It wasn't just the way they were standing that unsettled her. It was their energy, the palpable sense of something sinister in the air. Rocky must have sensed it too. He stopped walking beside her and turned his head toward the men, his ears stiff and his nose twitching. The low growl that rumbled from his throat sent a chill through the cool night. He was ready. Whatever these men were up to, they were no match for Rocky. "Hey, look at that," one of the men called out with a mocking tone. "Grandma's out for a stroll with her big bad wolf." Laughter followed, the kind of laughter that was as sharp as a blade, meant to belittle, to provoke. Martha's grip on the leash tightened. She wasn't afraid, not of the men, not of their words. She had seen far worse in her years as a nurse, and life had taught her not to give in to fear. But she knew this wasn't just a harmless joke. No, these men were up to something. Rocky moved closer to her, his growl deepening. He wasn't just reacting to the men's words. He was reacting to their energy, to the threat they posed. As they started to walk toward her, Martha's heartbeat quickened. There was something in their eyes, something darker than mere mocking, that told her this wasn't going to end well if she didn't act. The tallest of the three stepped forward, his hands held up in a mock gesture of innocence. "Relax, lady," he sneered. "We're just saying hello. No need for the guard dog act." But Martha wasn't fooled. She could feel the shift in the air, the change from idle teasing to something far more dangerous. And Rocky knew it, too. His growl turned into a bark, sharp and commanding, an unmistakable warning to back off. His posture shifted, His muscles tensed as he placed himself firmly between Martha and the men. His presence was imposing. But it wasn't just his size that was intimidating, it was the authority in his stance. The confidence of a dog who had been trained to handle threats just like this. The men laughed again, but there was uncertainty in their eyes now. One of them reached into his pocket and pulled out a gleaming metal object. The reflection of the streetlight made it shimmer for a moment, casting an eerie glow. It wasn't a knife, but something that looked equally dangerous. Something sharp. Martha's breath caught in her throat. She felt the fear creeping in, but she pushed it down, refusing to give in. She knew Rocky had been trained for moments just like this. Moments where fear was a weapon and instinct was a shield. "Don't worry, Grandma." The man with the sharp object taunted. "This will be over before you even blink." Rocky's growl intensified, a sound that vibrated through the air like a warning shot. The men moved closer, but Rocky was ready. And so was Martha. She had lived through too much to allow fear to guide her now. Her hands shook slightly, but her grip on the leash never faltered. Whatever these men were planning, they had no idea what they were about to face. The three men were closing in, their movements slow and deliberate, like wolves circling their prey. But they underestimated one thing. Martha and Rocky were not prey. They had faced danger before, and though this was a different kind of threat, it was no less real. The man with the knife-like object smirked, but his hand was shaking ever so slightly, betraying his nervousness. He had expected a vulnerable woman, maybe a scared old lady with no one to protect her. But Martha had lived a life filled with challenges. She had nursed the wounded, comforted the dying, and held her ground against more than one storm. And as for Rocky, well, his loyalty and training were beyond question. Rocky took a step forward, positioning himself between Martha and the men, his growl growing louder, his body rigid with focus. It wasn't just a warning anymore, it was a promise. If they dared to get any closer, they would feel the full force of his training. The tallest man raised his hand in mock surrender, as though trying to play it cool. All right, Grandma. No need to get your dog worked up. We're just having a bit of fun. No harm meant." His words were a facade, a thin veil over the malice that lay beneath. But Martha wasn't fooled. She took a slow step back, keeping her eyes on the men, never letting them out of her sight. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. But there was no panic. She was a nurse. She knew how to keep a cool head in a crisis. And in that moment, she knew what needed to happen. She had no intention of letting these men walk away unscathed. "Rocky," she said softly, her voice steady and calm, but carrying an authority that only came with years of experience. "Stay." Rocky's gaze never left the men, but his body relaxed just slightly, acknowledging Martha's command. He was waiting for her signal, just as he had done countless times before. Martha took another step back, her hand gripping the leash with a quiet strength. She didn't want to escalate things further, but she couldn't back down either. She knew she had to find a way out of this without putting herself or Rocky in harm's way. And in that moment, she had an idea. The man with the knife-like object was growing impatient, his gaze flicking between the dog and Martha, trying to gauge their next move. His eyes narrowed. "You think that old dog's going to stop me?" he taunted. "You're just one woman. What do you think you're going to do?" Martha didn't flinch. She knew the fear they were trying to provoke in her. She'd seen it before in the eyes of patients who were about to lose everything. But she'd also seen the way fear could paralyze, the way it could make people act impulsively, desperately. She wasn't going to give in to that. "I think," she said quietly, "you should leave. Now." The man took another step forward. But this time, Rocky's stance changed. He wasn't just a guard dog now. He was a protector, a force of nature, ready to strike if the threat became real. His muscles were taut, his eyes fixed on the man's every movement. But Martha wasn't depending solely on Rocky to keep them safe. She had a plan, a last-ditch effort to get herself out of this situation. She knew the town, the streets, and the paths through the park. She knew that if she could just make it to the street corner where the street lights were brighter, where there were houses nearby, she could call for help. but she had to make the right move at the right time. She took another step back, this time purposefully moving toward the edge of the sidewalk. Rocky moved with her, his body always between her and the men, his alertness never faltering. Martha's heart raced in her chest, but she kept her focus. The tallest man, sensing the change in her movements, grinned maliciously. "You can't run. Lady, we're faster than you." He lunged forward, but it was a mistake, a fatal one. Rocky, whose training had been honed over the years, reacted in an instant. With a powerful lunge, the dog surged forward, snapping at the man's wrist, the force of his teeth gripping the sleeve of his jacket. The man stumbled back, his face going pale with shock. "Jesus Christ," one of the other men shouted, backing away quickly. "What the hell is that dog doing?" The man with the knife-like object cursed, clutching his arm where Rocky had bitten him. It was a deep enough wound that blood began to seep through his jacket. His face twisted in pain and anger. But the sight of Rocky standing firm, the gleam of teeth bared in warning, was enough to make him rethink his actions. Martha seized the moment. She took a sharp breath, calling out, "Rocky, heel!" Rocky immediately stopped, his body relaxing as he returned to Martha's side. But his eyes never left the men. Martha took her chance and began to back away, slowly at first, then with more urgency. Her pace quickened as she moved toward the street corner. The men hesitated, unsure whether to follow or retreat. They had expected an easy target, but now they were confronted with something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. A woman who would not be intimidated, and a dog who would protect her at all costs. "Get the hell out of here!" one of the men yelled, his voice cracking with frustration. "We're done with this." They retreated quickly, muttering curses under their breath. They hadn't planned on dealing with a dog like Rocky, nor a woman with as much grit as Martha. They hadn't anticipated that someone would fight back. Martha didn't turn to watch them leave. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, where the first signs of another person's presence, a distant light, a shadow on the porch of a nearby house, appeared. She felt a rush of relief flood her body, but she also felt something else, pride. For herself, for Rocky, for the quiet, unspoken strength that had seen her through yet another dangerous moment. As she and Rocky made their way home, Martha's heart still pounded in her chest, but the terror was gone. In its place was a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had done what she needed to do. She had survived, and so had Rocky. The night had changed everything, not just for her, but for her understanding of what it meant to truly be safe, to have someone or something to rely on when the world turned dangerous. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would never take that bond for granted again. The next morning, the air in the small town was thick with gossip. Word had spread fast, almost too fast. By the time Martha had stepped out onto her porch with Rocky by her side, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, she was already receiving wary glances and hushed whispers from her neighbors. Martha wasn't one to be bothered by what others thought. She had never cared much for the small town chatter. But today was different. This was different. As she walked down the street with Rocky, her head held high and her stride steady, she could feel the eyes on her, the curiosity, the judgment, the awe. People knew what had happened the night before. They knew about the three men who had harassed her and the heroism of a dog who had driven them away. And, more than that, they knew Martha had faced them down with unwavering calm. At first, no one approached her. They kept their distance, unsure how to act. The small-town dynamic had always been one of unspoken rules. Don't get involved unless you have to. And certainly don't make waves. But now, Martha had made a wave that rippled through the town with such force that no one could ignore it. As she passed by Ms. Calloway's flower shop, she heard a soft voice behind her. "Martha." It was Clara, the woman who had lived down the street for as long as anyone could remember. Clara had always been polite, but they weren't particularly close. Still, her voice today carried a weight of respect, a tone that made Martha stop in her tracks. "Clara," Martha said, turning to face her. "Good morning." Clara stepped closer, her eyes scanning Rocky first before landing on Martha. She seemed almost hesitant, but her admiration was evident. I wanted to say I'm proud of you," Clara said softly. "What you did last night, that was brave. You saved yourself. And you saved that dog too." Martha smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was just doing what I had to do. I wasn't going to let them hurt us." Clara nodded, as though she understood. But there was something else there, something Martha couldn't quite place. "You're not just a town lady, you know," Clara said, her voice low. "You're something more now. People are talking about you. And not just about the dog, but about you. What you did. How you stood up to them. It's giving people courage." Martha blinked, not expecting such a response. Her gaze turned downward, as though looking for some sign in the cracked pavement beneath her feet. "I wasn't looking for courage, Clara. I was just trying to survive." Clara's eyes softened. "It's not just about survival. Martha, you showed everyone what it means to stand tall, even when the odds are stacked against you. You're not just surviving. You're leading by example. You're showing all of us that we don't have to accept being afraid." Martha paused, letting the weight of Clara's words settle on her. She had never thought of herself as a leader. She had always been the quiet woman who lived in the background, taking care of her family, tending to her garden, and staying out of trouble. But the way Clara spoke now made Martha reconsider the way others saw her, and perhaps the way she saw herself. "I never thought of it that way," Martha said after a beat, her voice quiet but thoughtful. Clara gave her a knowing smile. "It's the truth. Martha, the whole town is buzzing with your courage. And it's more than just bravery. It's a message. People are seeing that when someone stands up, it changes everything." Martha glanced down at Rocky, who was sitting calmly at her side, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Always alert, always ready. She could feel his presence, a steady reminder of how far they had come. And for the first time in a long while, she realized that she hadn't just protected herself that night. She had done something bigger, something more profound. "You're right," Martha said, a small sense of resolve settling over her. "It's not just about survival. It's about standing up and showing others that they can do the same." Before Clara could respond, a car pulled up beside them, a sleek, dark sedan that Martha recognized immediately. It was the town sheriff, Deputy Tom Hargrove. He was a man of few words, but he carried the weight of authority with quiet ease. His face was impassive, but there was a glint in his eyes that suggested he wasn't here just to check on the situation. "Martha," he called, rolling down the window. "Can we talk for a minute?" Clara gave Martha a nod and backed away, sensing this was a conversation she wasn't meant to overhear. Martha, however, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Deputy Hargrove was a good man, but his presence here, so soon after the events of the night, made her uneasy. "Of course, Deputy," she replied, walking over to the car. Hargrove watched her closely, his hands resting on the steering wheel. "We got word from the town hall," he began, his voice low. "The men from last night, well, it turns out they've got a reputation. They've been in trouble before. Nothing serious, but enough for us to keep an eye on them." Martha nodded slowly, though she wasn't surprised. Men like that rarely acted alone. "I figured as much," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Listen," Hargrove continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We got a few options for you. Martha, you can press charges, get a restraining order, that sort of thing. Or, if you're not interested in all that, we can make sure they know they've been warned. Word will spread fast that they're not to mess with you again." Martha thought for a moment. Part of her wanted to take the legal route, to make sure those men knew there were consequences for their actions. But another part of her, the part that had faced down her fears the night before, felt a deeper sense of satisfaction knowing that they were now aware they couldn't intimidate her. "I appreciate the offer, Deputy," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "But I think I've already sent my message." Hargrove studied her for a moment longer, as though weighing her words. Finally, he gave her a small nod. "Well, I'll make sure they get the message loud and clear. You've earned that much, Martha." As the deputy drove away, Martha stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had sent her message, not just to the men who would try to hurt her, but to the town, to the people who had always looked the other way when things got rough. And now, she realized it was her message to carry forward a message of courage, of resilience, of standing up when the world seemed against you. It wasn't just about one woman and one dog. It was about every person in that town, waking up to the possibility that they, too, could stand tall. Rocky nuzzled her side, sensing the shift in her mood. Martha's lips curled into a smile as she scratched his ears. "Come on, boy," she said softly, her heart light with newfound purpose. "Let's show them what else we're made of." And with that, they walked on, ready for whatever the world would throw at them next. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of courage and transformation. Martha's story reminds us that true heroism often comes from the most unexpected places. If you were moved by today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time on Empathy Stories, where every tale brings us closer together.